Prince Harry once believed Invictus Games would always remain his sanctuary, untouched by royal drama. But after King Charles and Prince William flatly rejected his request to appear at the 2027 Games, cracks had begun to show. What Harry framed as an olive branch was instead seen as manipulation, with Charles protecting the monarchy's image and William drawing a hard, personal line. The fallout has reached beyond the palace, as veterans, donors, and sponsors grow frustrated with the constant drama overshadowing the Games' true mission of honoring wounded warriors. Many now question whether Harry's presence has become a liability, and even within Invictus leadership, quiet discussions have emerged about the possibility of reducing his role. What was once his most unshakable achievement is now at risk of slipping away, leaving Harry more isolated than ever. From the moment Harry penned his carefully worded invitation, insiders say he believed it was the perfect opportunity to rebuild bridges with his family, while simultaneously strengthening his grip on the Games. He framed the letter to his father and brother as a gesture of unity, invoking shared values, service, and even the late Queen's legacy. But behind the palace gates, the response was swift and icy. Charles, increasingly mindful of the monarchy's fragile reputation, reportedly saw the request not as reconciliation, but as opportunism. William's reaction was even more cutting, a flat refusal delivered with the weight of personal grievance. The rejection was not merely about appearances at a sporting event. It represented a definitive shift in royal strategy. Both Charles and William have drawn lines in the sand, signaling that Harry will no longer be allowed to use royal connections as a shield against mounting controversies. In their view, granting Harry the royal stage in 2027 would send a disastrous message that he can attack the monarchy publicly, then retreat to its platforms whenever convenient. But Harry's fury was palpable. Close associates describe him as visibly shaken by what he sees as betrayal from his own bloodline. In his private circles, Harry has reportedly railed against his family's pettiness, accusing them of undermining a project that has brought hope and dignity to thousands of wounded veterans worldwide. What Harry refuses to acknowledge, however, is that the monarchy's rejection was as much about protecting Invictus itself as it was about limiting his influence. The problem, critics argue, is Harry's growing inability to separate himself from his creation. Invictus was meant to be about veterans, their stories, their sacrifices, their triumphs. But as the years passed and Harry's feud with the monarchy deepened, the Games became entangled in a narrative of royal conflict, exile, and personal grievances. Instead of headlines celebrating athletes overcoming impossible odds, the spotlight has too often been on Harry's strained relationship with his father and brother. And the veterans, donors, and sponsors have noticed the 2027 Games were supposed to be different. Hosted in Sydney, the event had all the makings of triumphant showcase, state-of-the-art venues, record-breaking international participation, and renewed corporate backing. For Harry, it was to be a chance to reclaim lost ground, to remind the world of his vision. But by reaching out to Charles and William, Harry inadvertently forced the monarchy into a decision it had long avoided, whether to publicly embrace or reject him. The palace's answer was decisive. Sources close to Buckingham insist that Charles agonized over the decision for weeks, weighing the symbolic power of royal unity against the risks of association. In the end, the risk proved greater. Allowing Harry back into the fold, even briefly, would blur the monarchy's messaging of accountability. It would have appeared as though years of attacks, memoirs, and interviews could be forgiven with a single photo opportunity. William, however, required no such deliberation. His stance was rooted in principle and personal hurt. Privately, William has told confidants that Harry cannot be trusted, that every olive branch extended is later weaponized in interviews or documentaries. By rejecting Harry outright, William not only denied him a royal stage, but also sent a clear message to the public. The monarchy is moving forward without him. For Invictus, the rejection was catastrophic. Harry's carefully orchestrated plan to highlight royal unity around veterans collapsed overnight, leaving organizers scrambling to manage the fallout. Sponsors began quietly asking questions. Would the Games still carry the same prestige without the symbolic presence of Charles or William? Would Harry's leadership continue to attract controversy instead of stability? And perhaps most pressing, could Invictus afford to keep tying itself so closely to a man who has become one of the most polarizing figures in the world? Behind closed doors, the questions grew sharper. Senior members of the Invictus Foundation began discreetly discussing what had once been unthinkable, reducing Harry's visible role. While no formal decisions have been made, insiders confirmed that contingency planning is underway, ensuring the game's survival should Harry's presence become untenable. This subtle but undeniable shift has shaken Harry to his core. The one institution he thought he could never lose is now considering a future without him. Yet Harry remains defiant. In conversations with allies, he has reportedly insisted that the monarchy is playing politics with veterans' lives, portray himself as a victim of a vendetta orchestrated by Charles and William. Meghan, too, has privately expressed frustration, arguing that the monarchy's coldness only validates their decision to leave in the first place. But what both fail to grasp, critics argue, is that Harry's personal wars are now threatening the very movement he once claimed was bigger than himself. And that is the greatest tragedy of all. What began as a pure vision to honor wounded warriors has become another battleground in the Windsor family feud. The rejection has set off a chain reaction with consequences far beyond the palace walls. Veterans who once viewed Harry as a champion now whisper doubts about his priorities. Donors question whether their contributions are funding athletes or fueling drama. And sponsors, wary of headlines that blur inspiration with scandal, wonder if Invictus can survive another decade tied to a prince at war with his family. Prince Harry's fury was not hidden behind palace walls this time. It spilled into his closest circles, making headlines across international media outlets. The rejection from Charles and William was more than a refusal to attend the 2027 Invictus Games. It was a symbol of just how far Harry had fallen from the center of a monarchy. Once considered the people's prince, he now appeared as a perpetual outsider, pleading for recognition, only to be cast aside. What cut deepest was the cold efficiency with which his father and brother dismissed his invitation. There was no lengthy debate, no back-and-forth negotiations. The rejection was swift, final, and unmistakably deliberate. Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, insiders revealed that Charles feared Harry's presence would turn the Invictus Games into yet another royal soap opera. For years, the Games have been one of Harry's few untarnished achievements, but the constant scandal surrounding him and Meghan had shifted public attention away from the athletes and onto the drama of the Sussexes' lives. For Charles, allowing Harry to step back into the royal spotlight under the Invictus banner risked dragging the monarchy into another spectacle it could ill afford. William, on the other hand, had more personal reasons. His fractured relationship with his brother, marred by years of accusations, betrayals, and explosive interviews, had hardened into a cold resolve. By rejecting Harry's request, William made a clear statement. Reconciliation was no longer on the table. This rejection had ripple effects that extended far beyond the palace. Sponsors and donors, already weary of the relentless controversies surrounding Harry, began voicing their concerns in private meetings. Many argued that the Games, once celebrated as an event that united veterans and showcased resilience, were now overshadowed by Harry's personal struggles. Some questioned whether continuing to tie the Invictus brand so closely to Harry was sustainable in the long run. In hushed tones, members of the organizing committee acknowledged that while Harry had been the founder and face of Invictus, the Games might survive, perhaps even thrive, without him. For Harry, this possibility was unthinkable. Invictus was not just a project. It was his legacy, the one accomplishment he believed could outlast the scandals and secure his place in history. To see whispers emerge about his diminishing relevance struck at the heart of his identity. Those close to him described his mood as volatile, swinging between anger at his family and despair at the thought of losing the one achievement that had given him purpose after leaving the military. Meghan, ever the strategist, reportedly urged him to reclaim control of the narrative, advising him to frame the rejection as yet another example of royal cruelty. But even her support could not mask the reality. The monarchy had drawn a line, and Harry was firmly on the other side. What made matters worse was the timing. The Games had recently gained renewed international interest, with several governments pledging increased support and veterans organizations pushing for wider recognition. For the first time in years, Invictus was poised to expand its global influence. Yet, the narrative dominating headlines was not about the veterans, but about Harry's personal rejection. Critics accused him of hijacking the moment to push his own agenda, and even loyal supporters began to question whether he was doing more harm than good to the very cause he claimed to champion. This left Harry trapped in a paradox. The more he fought to cling to Invictus, the more his presence became controversial. The more he tried to frame himself as a victim of royal coldness, the more he appeared self-serving and detached from the true purpose of the games. Every move he made seemed to confirm a narrative his critics had been painting for years, that Harry was a man unable to separate his personal grievances from the institutions and causes he once stood for. In the weeks that followed, insiders revealed that Harry attempted one last desperate strategy. He reached out privately to several high-profile sponsors, hoping to rally their support and force the royal family into reconsidering their stance. But instead of securing loyalty, his calls raised alarm. One sponsor, speaking on condition of anonymity, described the tone of Harry's outreach as borderline frantic, a plea rather than a plan. Another suggested that Harry was using the games as leverage in his ongoing feud with the monarchy, which only deepened their hesitation. Instead of pressuring Charles and William, these private conversations reinforced the perception that Harry was unstable and increasingly disconnected from reality. Meanwhile, the palace stood firm. Neither Charles nor William issued public statements, a silence that was deliberate and strategic. By refusing to engage, they denied Harry the public sparring match he seemed to crave. Instead, they let the narrative unfold naturally. Harry, as he isolated, rejected Prince, whose pleas for recognition went unanswered. The monarchy, by contrast, appeared steady, restrained, and above the noise. This contrast only deepened Harry's frustration, as every attempt to reclaim control of the story slipped further from his grasp.